So I came into Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater with a pretty fresh perspective, as the Metal Gear Solid series has always been in my peripheral but never in focus. You see, I watched my roommate play through Metal Gear Solid and Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty like 15 years ago, and I've seen snippets of memes and what have you of Metal Gear Solid 3, 4, and 5. I know the difference between Naked Snake and Solid Snake, and that there was/is a Venom Snake out there somewhere. I know that Ocelot is an important recurring character, and I of course know that a Metal Gear is essentially a nuke-wielding mech.
Metal Gear.
But that's about it. Still, I jumped at the chance when Gamer Guides tapped me to play MGS Delta early and put out some video guides for it. In doing so, I could finally experience this narrative-heavy series originally directed by the legendary Hideo Kojima firsthand, and see if the 2-decade-old story in this remake could keep me entertained. And it did. Video over. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe. No, but really, I had a lot of fun playing through MGS Delta, and while many fans might lament certain creative choices in this remake, I came away regretful that I never put aside the time to experience the prominent themes of loyalty this stealth action game posits, alongside so much laugh-out-loud absurdity. That said, as always, I do have some narrative criticisms. That's kind of what I do. Let's begin. MGS Delta faked me out in the beginning as it set up stakes. It was far more serious than I expected. It got to the point where Major Zero's insistence that Snake could not, in any circumstance, be seen lest World War III break out had me overly cautious when playing the actual game. Of course, it doesn't really matter if enemies see you and send in a bunch of reinforcements to mow down, unless you're trying to finish the game without taking a life. But I appreciated the high stakes the narrative put forth even if they weren't reflected in the gameplay. Through the introduction of the boss, Snake's former mentor and maybe enmeshed motherly lover figure at the beginning, the narrative also hammered home a central theme: unwavering loyalty to your country and what that gets you. I did feel like the boss's dialogue here was heavy-handed enough that it gave away her impending betrayal. I'm not sure if people who played the original saw this early game twist coming, but I wish she were a bit more subtle with your questioning of both loyalty in general and Snake's role as a soldier, given that this is all within the first 10 minutes of the game. Regardless, presenting both the stakes and the theme right in the opening really harkens back to when game narratives were much more simple. That said, many modern games still fail to lay them out clearly, bulldozing over story structure in the name of gameplay. Just watch my Monster Hunter Wilds story critique to see what I mean. As a result, MGS Delta's opening was a breath of nostalgic fresh air. I knew that a nuclear holocaust rested on the shoulders of one grisly-voiced soldier, and that the loyalty such soldiers have toward their country would come into question. I was already hooked and motivated to see this story through, and not just because Gamer Guides was paying me to make a video of all the Gakko and Karotan locations. And then, like in the best stories out there, everything went wrong. And unlike most spy thrillers out there, things got really weird. Snake completes the first part of his mission and rescues Sokolov, the scientist responsible for a rocket-propelled and nuclear-equipped tank called the Shagohod. Of course, the boss betrays Snake alongside Russian Raiden, B-Man, Old Man Bulgy Eyes, Creepy Vampire Dude, Inverse Mr. Freeze, and even a ghost, otherwise known as Colonel Volgin and the Cobra Unit, showcasing some borderline fantastical absurdity for the first time that gave me a bit of whiplash, as up until this point MGS Delta seemed like a grounded spy thriller. These absurdities grew on me right away though, especially this B-napping of Sokolov, though I never warmed up to Colonel Volgin as a primary antagonist despite some of his, let's call them eccentricities. More on him later. Anyway, a repeated scene throughout MGS Delta is the boss absolutely handing Snake his ass, and this first encounter is no different. Snake barely survives, gets extracted, and returns a week later with his initial goal intact: rescue Sokolov before he completes the Shagohod. More importantly, he now has to kill his mentor, the boss, after her betrayal to the United States, giving Snake a direct conflict between his country and his motherly mentor figure. There's some scenes around this time that ground the narrative in real-world history through how President Johnson and Khrushchev came to an agreement as Volgin is acting against the Soviet government. But I feel like these scenes take a backseat to the character drama that is Naked Snake, the boss Eva, the will she won't she betray you spy movie love interest, and to a lesser extent Major Ocelot. In fact, let's talk about Ocelot. Here he feels a bit like a prequel plant to me from a newcomer's perspective. Let me explain. He clearly is important to later stories but has little influence on MGS Delta's plot. If you think about all his scenes with Snake, dueling with him before getting interrupted by the Cobra Unit, watching him get tortured and accidentally shooting out his eye, chasing him on a motorcycle, Fighting him aboard the aircraft at the end, none of them have a direct impact on plot progression. As far as I can tell, everything would have happened with or without Ocelot. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but there's no point where he saves or clearly assists Snake, though the reverse often happens, and he isn't really involved in taking down Volgin, even though he was meant to be Snake's original insider, Adam, before Eva took his place. The true goal of most of the players in this story, including Ocelot, isn't the Shagohod or Sokolov, but something called the Philosopher's Legacy, a $100 billion slush fund stored on microfilm that the world's superpowers put together after World War II to fund advanced warfare technologies. Volgin currently has it, and it's later revealed that Ocelot is working behind the scenes to obtain it for the CIA through manipulating the boss and Snake, though we don't see him actively do any of this. I would have liked to see his guiding hand a bit more, as the reveal about his triple agent status post-credits fell a little flat for me. Anyway, despite having little impact on the story, Ocelot does fit into the theme of loyalty in an albeit shallow way, as he seems loyal to the Soviet government and questions Volgin's methods as a colonel gone rogue. He isn't loyal to either. He's truly loyal to the United States, or at least the American branch of the Philosopher organization. Again, I would have liked to see him directly affect the narrative in some way, not just set himself up for his immense effect on the other MGS games. Sure, we see him help Snake a couple of times or let him get away through firing a blank or messing up in some manner, and I did find the growing rivalry between them entertaining enough, but if Ocelot weren't there at all, the story beats wouldn't have changed. The story beats definitely would have changed without Eva in the story, however. I quite enjoyed how Snake acted like a shy schoolboy around her, subverting my expectations of how a suave, capable lead in a spy thriller should act. I wouldn't want to kiss a dude that had been crawling through the jungle and munching on snakes, but Snake's hesitation and blatant staring at her chest endeared me to their awkward relationship. More importantly, the tension of whether or not she was truly a Soviet spy or a real double agent kept me interested every time she popped up. Once again, she fed into the central theme of loyalty to her country. It appeared as if she betrayed the United States to join the USSR, and then flipped again to get close to Volgin and help Snake. In the end, it's revealed she's actually working with China to get a hold of the Philosopher's Legacy. Part of her mission was to kill everyone involved, including Snake. Instead, she chooses to let him live, not because they became lovers, but because of loyalty to the boss after she saved Eva's life. More importantly, the way the United States used the boss to get their hands on the Philosopher's Legacy challenged her own sense of loyalty to her country to the point where she lets Snake live and sets up events for future games, making her both an intriguing character and a vital one to this narrative. Keep this in mind, she's one of the only characters that didn't stay completely loyal to her country, so her story in MGS Delta didn't end in tragedy. The Cobra's stories, on the other hand, all ended in tragedy, and this is where my first real criticisms of the narrative emerge. Other than their absurd aesthetics, their inclusion in the narrative fell flat. They clearly have loyalty to the boss over the United States. However, this never comes into play enough to flesh them out as memorable characters. Their titles, The Pain, The End, The Fear, The Fury, and later, The Sorrow, had my creative writing major senses tingling. I expected them to work as a metaphor for either Snake's or the boss's internal struggle, but this never materialized. Like, maybe the pain represents how the boss feels betraying her country for the greater good, and the fear represents how scared she feels taking such a risk or something, but I couldn't quite see any of that depth here. Maybe, if you squint a little bit, their demise at the hands of Snake can emphasize how remaining steadfastly loyal, this time to the boss, leads to tragedy, but that's a bit of a stretch. Deeper meaning or not, they all come off as weakly Scooby-Doo villains with their quirky powers. The Fury, for example, went down easily and in the end was just a dude in a suit with a flamethrower. On the other hand, I did quite enjoy facing the End despite how his bulgy eyes grossed me out. I did a video for Gamer Guides detailing all the different ways to defeat him, which added to his characterization for me. You can snipe him early while soldiers are pushing him about in a wheelchair, and if you wait a week before defeating him, the dude just dies of old age. There's some bittersweet commentary on career soldiers here, loyal to the end, to their mentor, finally at rest at the hands of a new generation of soldier and warfare. Volgin, on the other hand, I found too comically evil. In one of his first scenes, he nukes a bunch of his own countrymen for fun. Worse, he abuses Eva, which makes him just an abhorrently black villain, rather than a dark gray one where you can sometimes get where he's coming from. Sure, he has a couple comedic scenes when it comes to one of his subordinates, Rykov, and the way he brutally tortures Snake certainly makes taking him down satisfying, but I don't find him a particularly memorable antagonist. I mean, according to Sokolov, Volgin wants to mass-produce the Shagohod nuclear tanks with the Philosopher's Legacy and ship them all over the Eastern Bloc, which will, and I quote, render the concept of nuclear deterrence utterly meaningless. and that the entire planet will be consumed by the fires of war. Volgin says he just wants to make the world whole again through force, but I'm more likely to believe Sokolov here, as Volgin is clearly going against the wishes of the Soviet government that wants an upper hand in the Cold War. He has loyalty to no one but himself, but the narrative never gives us a concrete reason as to why exactly that is. Sokolov, however, stands out as a very memorable character. The second time you rescue him in Grozny Grad, he steals the show with the most prominent monologue in the entire game. He insists he doesn't want to be extradited to the United States anymore, despite being able to see his family again, because they'll simply make him work on their weapons of mass murder instead. Just watch this scene.
And my creations do not even benefit mankind. They are merely the tools of politicians.
This is some nice commentary on how governments around the world treat their scientific minds during wartime. Even after completing the Shagohod, Sokolov wouldn't get any rest. Loyalty to his country means death for him, and extradition to the United States, betrayal of his country, means creating more horrors. He'd rather do neither, even if that means he never reunites with his family. In turn, this reflects on Snake as a soldier trying to rescue him, as he'd be actively aiding in the creation of such weapons on one side rather than the other if he did. I wish I got to hear Snake say something about this in David Hayter's gravelly voice before Volgin walks in and grabs the disguised Snake by the balls. But I'll just have to imagine how he felt about Sokolov's words before the latter got his knees blown out. That all leaves us with the boss, Metal Gear Solid Delta's theme personified. Wondering what could have made this legendary super soldier and spy break her loyalty to her country kept me playing more than any other story beat. Given how unnecessarily evil Volgin was, I couldn't imagine what would have triggered her defection. It wasn't until everyone started talking about the Philosopher's Legacy that I got an inkling of what was going on, and my suspicions weren't proven correct until the end of the game. Not only was she pretending to betray her country in order to get close to the Philosopher's Legacy, she had to take the fall for Volgin's use of nuclear weaponry as it caused political tensions during the Cold War. You see, the United States needed someone to blame for that nuclear explosion, and a rogue agent was a perfect fit to keep both the Soviet and American populations unquestioning. What's more, she had to die for it. Such a traitor couldn't live and still maintain the status quo. And perhaps more importantly, her death would cover up all American involvement in stealing the Philosopher's Legacy back. This tragic role required the boss to have strong motivations to convince people she's truly defective, and she gave two reasons for it. The US set her against the Sorrow, one of her former pupils and her lover, and the Philosophers stole her child after she gave birth during D-Day of all places. In a game with only two women, one of them being a love interest, her lost child backstory dampened my enthusiasm for her inspired actions. Pregnancy-related trauma is an overused trope when it comes to women in way too many stories, especially male-dominated ones, and I really think she just didn't need it for her character, given that she had more than enough motivation to make you, as Snake, believe that she truly did defect. I mean, I might have accepted this pregnancy angle more readily if it was foreshadowed a little more. It just came out of nowhere in her final monologue before the final boss fight and felt a little lazy to me. Anyway, not long after a powerful scene where you fire the final shot that kills the boss, and it gets a little bit too artsy as her pregnancy scar turns into a snake or something, Eva reveals in a recorded message that the boss did what she did to get the Philosopher's Legacy back for the United States. Yes, she never betrayed them. She was loyal to the end despite her government taking everything from her. Her lover, her child, her reputation, and her life. Her country still won by manipulating her prized disciple into killing her. Her loyalty kept the Philosopher's Legacy out of a madman's hands, but doing so ruined so many lives in the process, including her own. Pretty impressive stuff for a game from 2004. But maybe those working behind the scenes in the United States government didn't truly win. The boss's actions set up Snake, now known as Big Boss, to become the antagonist in later games, as he's clearly disillusioned after the role he played in taking down his mentor. Of course, I can't really comment on how his character develops. Again, I'm more or less new to the series, but MGS Delta impressed me enough with how it handled its themes that I want to play the other titles, including the original Metal Gear Solid 3. So if I were to summarize my criticisms, I'd want to see the Cobra unit fleshed out a bit more to fit into the central theme, give Volgin a bit more motivation for being so comically evil, grant Ocelot some agency over the course the story takes, and nix the pregnancy backstory for the boss, or at least foreshadow it a little bit more. Criticisms aside, I now better understand why this series is so celebrated. I found the narrative strong enough to have me looking forward to the next lengthy cutscene and exposition-filled monologue, while the absurdity of some of the characters and dialogue made it stand out as one of the more memorable stories I've experienced in recent memory. It holds up so well even 2 decades after it was originally told. But what about you? How do you find Snake Eater's narrative, whether the original game or this remake, in 2025? Do you agree or disagree with my criticisms or how I zeroed in on the central theme of loyalty? Let me know in the comments, I'll do my best to respond. And if you don't know who I am, my name's Lowell and I'm a freelance game critic, guide writer, and content creator for websites like Nintendo Life, PC Games End, and Gamer Guides. I believe video games have the potential to become the best way to tell stories given their interactive nature, but we're not quite there yet. So here I am critiquing them until then. If more story critiques sound interesting to you and you enjoyed my take on MGS Delta, consider liking and subscribing. These videos will become much more frequent once my daughter gets a little older. She's only 5 months old right now. That said, have an eye on my channel for a Borderlands 4 story critique shortly after it launches. Thanks, bye.